A Commentary on Light on the Path by Annie Besant and Charles Webster Leadbeater. Introduction. Light on the Path stands as one of several distinct occult treatises preserved within the custody of the great teachers and employed in the instruction of disciples. It forms a constituent of the Book of the Golden Precepts, comprising numerous treatises composed during diverse epochs of the world, yet possessing a singular shared attribute. They embody occult truth and must, consequently, be scrutinized via a method distinct from that applied to mundane literature. Comprehension of these works is contingent upon the reader's capacity. Furthermore, when any such text is disseminated to the public, only a warped perception of its doctrine will be acquired should it be interpreted literally. Explicitly intended to accelerate the evolution of those traversing the path, this volume advances ideals that secular society is seldom prepared to embrace. Only to the extent that a man is capable and willing to inhabit the teaching will he be able to understand it. If he fails to practice it, the volume will remain a book hermetically sealed to him. Any endeavor to live the teaching will illuminate it. Conversely, should the reader exert no such effort, he will not merely derive minimal benefit, but will turn against the text, dismissing it as futile. This treatise separates naturally into specific divisions. It was bequeathed to the Western world by the Master Hilarion, one of the eminent teachers affiliated with the White Lodge, a master who assumed a significant role within the Gnostic and Neoplatonic movements, and one of the distinguished figures who endeavored to sustain the vitality of Christianity. His incarnations have occurred predominantly within Greece and Rome, and he maintains a particular solicitude for directing the evolution of the Western world. He acquired the text in its present form, excluding the annotations, from the Venetian master, one of the superior teachers whom Helena Blavatsky designated as Chohans. 15 of the concise rules located in the first section of this volume, and 15 in the second, are of immense antiquity, having been inscribed in the most primordial Sanskrit. To these brief aphorisms, utilized as a foundation for the disciples' tutelage, the Chohan appended further sentences which now constitute an integral part of the book. These must invariably be read in conjunction with the former to provide complementary concepts, without which the reader might be led astray. All rules within both sections of the text, barring the 30 brief aphorisms, were composed by the Chohan who entrusted the work to the Master Hilarion. The subsequent tabulation displays the 15 concise rules in Part 1 as they existed in the exceedingly ancient manuscript. The numeral preceding each represents the original classification, whereas the concluding numeral denotes that which appears in the contemporary edition. It may be observed from the aforementioned table that rules 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and 21 are absent from the enumeration. This is because they do not pertain to the most archaic portion of the volume. Those specific rules, along with the preliminary and concluding commentaries, constitute the segment added by the Greater One who bestowed the text upon the Master. Furthermore, there exist notes authored by the Master Hilarion himself. The book, as originally published in 1885, comprised these three components: the aphorisms from the ancient manuscript, the editions of the Chohan, and the annotations of the Master Hilarion. All these were transcribed by Mabel Collins, who served as the physical instrument, indeed as the very pen that inscribed the words. The Master was himself the translator of the work, and he impressed it upon her mind. His was the hand that wielded the pen. Subsequently, there appeared in Lucifer, under the title of Comments, several articles authored by Mabel Collins under the Master's influence. These are exceedingly valuable and merit both reading and study. Now, addressing the book itself, we first encounter the following declaration. These rules are written for all disciples. Tend you to them. A distinction is established here between the world and the disciples. This is not a volume intended for the general populace. The term disciple is to be interpreted in a dual sense: the uninitiated and the initiated. In perusing the book with care, one can trace two distinct lineages of instruction clad in identical verbiage. Each sentence harbors a double meaning, one intended for the more advanced, the other for the less advanced. We shall endeavor to delineate these when we address the preliminary statements. The second section of the treatise appears designated entirely for the initiated disciple. However, this duality permeates the first section. Many individuals not yet approaching discipleship wholly misunderstand these regulations, frequently criticizing them for upholding an ideal that is arduous and devoid of sympathy. This is invariably the case when an ideal is presented that transcends the reader's grasp. No individual is aided by an ideal, however noble intrinsically, that fails to attract him. It is a practical lesson in human relations that we should place before others only such ideals as may compel them. Regarding all literature of this genre, that which a man derives from it correlates to what he brings to it. His comprehension depends upon his own capacity to resonate with the thoughts contained therein. Even material entities exist for us only if we have developed the organs capable of responding to them. Hence, at the present juncture, there are hundreds of vibrations acting upon us to which we are incapable of paying heed. Sir William Crookes once illustrated this concept effectively when attempting to demonstrate how circumscribed our knowledge of electricity was, and consequently, how vast was the potential for progress in electrical science. He posited that it would effect an enormous difference. Indeed, it would revolutionize our concepts, were we to possess organs responsive to electrical vibrations rather than eyes sensitive to luminous vibrations. In arid air, we should remain unconscious of everything, for it does not conduct electricity. A structure composed of glass would appear opaque, whereas an ordinary dwelling would be transparent. A silver wire would resemble a void or tunnel within the atmosphere. Thus, what we perceive of the world depends upon our response to its vibrations. Similarly, if we cannot respond to a truth, it does not constitute truth for us. Therefore, when engaging with texts authored by occultists, we can apprehend their thought only in proportion to our own spiritual advancement. Any portion of their ideation that is too subtle or elevated simply passes us by as though it did not exist. Far more may be extracted from this book through meditation than through mere reading. Its supreme value lies in the direction it affords our meditation. Select a single sentence and meditate upon it. Arrest the operations of the lower mind and awaken the inner consciousness, which comes directly into contact with the thought. One may thus transcend the images of the concrete mind to achieve a direct perception of the truth. Meditation thus enables one to obtain within the brain a vast quantity of the direct knowledge of truth which the ego has acquired in his own realms. Nevertheless, a man who meditates but neglects to read or attend to a teacher, although certain to progress on the spiritual plane, will do so only gradually. Had he possessed the additional advantage of reading or listening, he would have advanced far more rapidly. The lecture or study can attune the student's brain so that it may acquire greater knowledge through meditation. However, for a man who merely listens or reads without meditating, scarcely any advancement is possible, and progress remains exceedingly slow. Both disciplines should be combined. Much meditation and a modicum of hearing or reading will carry a man far indeed. C. W. Leadbeater. On the title page of the first edition of Light on the Path, published in 1885, it is described as follows: a treatise written for the personal use of those who are ignorant of the Eastern wisdom, and who desire to enter within its influence. Yet the book itself commences with the statement that these rules are written for all disciples. The latter description is surely the more accurate, as the history of the volume will demonstrate. In its extant form, the text was transcribed under the dictation of the Master Hilarion by Mabel Collins, a distinguished figure in theosophical circles who, at one period, collaborated with Madame Blavatsky in the editorship of Lucifer. The Master Hilarion had, in turn, acquired this knowledge from his own preceptor, the august personage who is often designated by theosophical students as the Venetian. However, even he was responsible for merely a portion of the work. It has undergone 3 distinct phases. Let us delineate them in sequence. It remains a slender volume even now, yet the original form in which we have observed it is more diminutive still. It is a palm-leaf manuscript of incalculable antiquity, so ancient that even prior to the Christian era, humanity had totally consigned to oblivion both its date and the name of its scribe, regarding its origin as lost in the obscurity of prehistoric antiquity. It comprises 10 leaves, and upon each leaf are inscribed 3 lines only, for in a palm-leaf manuscript the lines extend longitudinally along the page, rather than transversely as is the convention in the Occident. Each line is self-contained, a succinct maxim, and the language in which they are composed is an archaic form of Sanskrit. The Venetian master rendered these aphorisms from Sanskrit into Greek for the edification of his Alexandrian pupils, of whom the Master Hilarion was one during his incarnation as Iamblichus. Not only did he translate the aphorisms, but he appended to them certain elucidations, which we would be prudent to consider in conjunction with the original. For instance, upon examination of the first 3 aphorisms, we shall discern that the paragraph designated as number 4, which succeeds them, is manifestly designed as a commentary upon them. Thus, we should interpret the sequence in this manner: kill out ambition, but work as those work who are ambitious. Kill out desire of life, but respect life as those do who desire it. Kill out desire of comfort, but be happy as those are who live for happiness. Similarly, Rules 5, 6, and 7 constitute a group, succeeded by Rule 8, which acts as a commentary by the Chohan, and this pattern continues deep into the progression of the book. These triads are not arranged thus by mere happenstance, but by intention. If we scrutinize them, we shall ascertain that there exists a definite nexus between the 3 in each instance. For example, the 3 rules grouped together above signify purity of heart and equanimity of spirit. It may be posited that they delineate the aspirant's obligations to himself, or his duty in the realm of preparation for labor. The second set of 3 aphorisms mandates the eradication of all sense of separateness, the desire for sensation, and the hunger for growth. They delineate man's duty to his social environment. He must comprehend that he exists in integral unity with his fellows. He must be prepared to relinquish selfish and distinct pleasures. He must extinguish the desire for personal advancement and labor for the advancement of the collective. In the subsequent set of 3, we are instructed regarding what to desire: that which is within us, that which is beyond us, and that which is unattainable. These are indisputably a man's duty to his higher self. Subsequently, there appear aphorisms concerning the desire for power, peace, and possessions. These are all desires which equip the aspirant for the work of the path. The succeeding group of rules instructs the seeker on how to pursue the path. The rules currently numbered 4, 8, 12, etc. are elucidations and amplifications provided by the Venetian master. These, in conjunction with the original aphorisms, constituted the volume as it was first published in 1885, for the master Hilarion translated it from Greek into English and presented it in that form. Scarcely had it emerged from the press when he added to it a number of inestimable notes of his own. For that inaugural edition, those notes were printed on separate pages, the reverse of which bore an adhesive so that they might be affixed at the commencement and conclusion of the slender volume which had just passed through publication. In subsequent publications, those notes have been inserted into their respective contexts. The exquisite treatise on karma which appears at the conclusion of the book is also authored by the Venetian master and was included in the volume from the first edition. The archaic Sanskrit manuscript which served as the foundation of Light on the Path was also translated into Egyptian, and many of the explanations provided by the Venetian master resonate more distinctly with Egyptian than with Indian teaching. Therefore, the student who can immerse himself in some measure in the spirit of that ancient civilization will discover a profound aid to his comprehension of this book. The circumstances prevailing in ancient Egypt were fundamentally divergent from those of the present day. It is well nigh impossible to convey their nature to the contemporary mind, yet if we could revert to the psychological orientation of those ancient times, we should perceive much which, I fear, we currently overlook. We are accustomed to overestimating the intellect of the present era, and are prone to exalting the advances we have achieved beyond the old civilizations. There indubitably exist certain points in which we have advanced beyond them, but there are other matters in which we are in no wise at their level. The comparison is perhaps somewhat inequitable, however, because our civilization is as yet nascent. If we retrogress 300 years in the history of Europe, and especially the history of England, we discover a social condition which appears decidedly barbaric. When we compare these 300 years, including the 150 years of scientific development which have assumed such prominence in our civilized history, with the 4,000 years through which the Egyptian civilization thrived virtually immutable, we perceive at once that ours is a trivial matter. Any civilization which has endured for 4 millennia has possessed the opportunity to attempt manifold experiments and to achieve outcomes which we have not yet attained. Thus, it is unjust to compare us in our inception with any of the great civilizations at their apogee. Our 5th subrace has assuredly not reached its pinnacle or its greatest glory, and that point, when attained, will represent a definitive improvement upon all other civilizations, particularly in certain respects. It will possess its own characteristics, and some of them may appear to us less agreeable than those of earlier civilizations, but in the aggregate it will constitute an advance, because the successive races are analogous to the tide when the waves are advancing. Each advances and recedes, and the subsequent one advances incrementally further. They all possess their ascendance and culmination, and their dissolution. In our epoch, the tide is still rising. Consequently, we do not yet possess the established stability in certain respects that was present in some of the older civilizations. We are, unfortunately, distant indeed from the actualization of unselfishness, from the conviction that the community as a whole is the paramount concern, rather than the individual. That state was attained in some of the older civilizations to an extent which would appear to us now a veritable utopia, but on the other hand, we are acquiring dominion over powers which those ancient peoples did not possess. There existed a brief interval in the early history of Rome when none was for the party and all were for the state, as phrased by Macaulay. Pythagoras, exhorting the populace at Taormina, declared that the state was superior to father and mother, superior even to wife and child, and that every man should always be prepared to surrender his own thoughts, feelings, and wishes for the sake of unity, for the residential publica, the original of republic, the commonwealth or well-being of the whole, to which everyone should be willing to sacrifice his personal interests. In England, too, in the era of Queen Elizabeth, there existed a period of such genuine patriotic fervor and activity. I do not imply that in ancient Egypt or in ancient Greece or elsewhere in the world, the entire populace was unselfish. Assuredly not, yet all educated persons adopted a significantly broader perspective, a far more communal view of life than we currently do. They prioritized the state to a much greater degree and subordinated their individual welfare or progress. We are destined to attain to that condition as well, and upon doing so, we ought to realize it more fully than any of the ancient races, while simultaneously contributing a degree of development which the older civilizations did not possess. If, then, we could return to that primordial Egyptian perspective, we should comprehend light on the path with vastly superior insight. The student would be well advised to endeavor to engender that attitude within himself during his scrutiny of the text, that it may facilitate his ability to place himself in the position of those who studied it in antiquity. This undertaking is comparatively effortless for those among us who have undergone the discipline that enables us to recall our past lives. I retain the memory of my own immediate past incarnation in Greece, wherein I participated in the Eleusinian mysteries, as well as a considerably earlier existence in which the great mysteries of Egypt, of which some vestiges still persist in Freemasonry, figured prominently. This recollection empowers me to derive greater benefit from such treatises than would be possible in the absence of such memory. Even impressions from the past, conveying a sense of the prevailing atmosphere, are of substantial assistance. Whether of Egyptian or Indian provenance, there exists no more precious gem in our theosophical literature, nor any volume that shall more bountifully repay the most meticulous and granular examination. As previously elucidated, Light on the Path constituted the first of three treatises occupying a unique position in our theosophical literature, inasmuch as they proffer directions from those who have trodden the path to those who desire to tread it. I recall that the late Swami T. Subbarao once informed us that its precepts possessed several layers of meaning, and that they could be interpreted repeatedly as directives for diverse stages of progression. Initially, they are utilitarian for the aspirants, those who are navigating the probationary path. Subsequently, they commence anew at a superior level for the individual who has entered upon the path proper through the portal of the first of the great initiations. Furthermore, upon the attainment of adeptship, it is posited that once more, in a sense still more elevated, these identical precepts may be perceived as guidelines for one who presses onward toward yet loftier accomplishments. In this manner, for the man capable of comprehending it in the totality of its mystic import, this manual transports us further than any other. These texts, which are explicitly composed for the acceleration of the evolution of those upon the path, advance ideals that men of the mundane world are generally unprepared to embrace. Even among dedicated students, there may be some who marvel at the form in which the doctrine is presented. The sole method of understanding is to accept it axiomatically and endeavor to embody it in one's life. In At the Feet of the Master, It is stated that it suffices not to declare the work poetic and beautiful. A man desiring success must execute exactly what the master commands, attending to every word and seizing every intimation. This principle is equally applicable to the present volume. The individual who does not attempt to live in accordance with the teaching will incessantly encounter points therein which will disturb his equanimity, and with which he will find himself in substantial disagreement. However, should he endeavor to live it, the sense in which it is to be interpreted will eventually dawn upon him. Any sincere exertion to genuinely enact the teaching invariably illuminates it, and that constitutes the solitary manner in which this priceless pearl may be appreciated. In such tomes, there resides a significance far exceeding that which the actual words convey. Therefore, to a considerable extent, each man extracts from them precisely what he brings to them. He contributes the capacity to assimilate a specific portion of their message and secures only that portion. Merely to peruse these books, or even to study them, is consequently insufficient. It is imperative to meditate upon them as well. If one selects the passages that appear somewhat arduous, the cryptic, mystical, and paradoxical statements, and contemplates and meditates upon them, one derives significantly more substance from them, although frequently one can scarcely articulate it. I endeavor to express that which occurs to me regarding these various points, and what they have signified to me, yet I remain perpetually conscious that I am not fully conveying my meaning. I acknowledge that, quite often, I cannot articulate the entire concept residing within my mind. When I translate it into words, it sounds quite commonplace, and yet I perceive for myself a vast magnitude of higher significance. I perceive that, perhaps via the agency of my mental body, the same phenomenon obtains at each level. In addition to that which we can realize with the mental body, there exists yet more that can be realized only through the causal body and through intuition. Whatever we articulate, there will always remain something profounder still budding and coming to flower within us. That man is but an expression of the eternal, and that nothing extraneous to the eternal can succor us, is true, and it is the verity upon which the three writers of this book constantly insist. Besant. Chapter 1. The four preliminary statements. Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. Besant. This constitutes the initial assertion among four propositions that delineate the quadruple qualifications prerequisite to the path proper. These statements define authentic vision, authentic audition, authentic speech, and the authentic capacity to stand in the presence of the master, which is to signify the genuine capability to serve mankind under his direction. This declaration, along with the subsequent three, is designed for two distinct categories of disciples. The first category encompasses those traversing the probationary path, who are consequently being instructed to divest themselves of all that we designate as the personality. These preliminary injunctions are purposed to demonstrate that they must commence by eradicating the lower self. The second category comprises those who have already attained initiation. From them, a greater exigency is required. They are obliged to relinquish their individuality, the reincarnating ego, such that at the culmination of the path, their existence shall be entirely subject to the governance of the monad. We shall observe, therefore, that each of these four aphorisms may be interpreted as influencing either the personality or the individuality, and commensurate with the status of the student endeavoring to embody their teaching will be the perspective from which he comprehends them. It is merited to note and retain that these declarations may also be approached from two distinct viewpoints in an alternative manner. Although these doctrines originate from the masters of the White Lodge, Precisely identical assertions are propounded by those who practice the black magic of the dark aspect of existence, whom we occasionally designate as the brothers of the shadow or of darkness. There exist two methods by which the eyes may become incapable of tears, and dependent upon his motive shall be the trajectory along which the aspirant proceeds. One method is that of the individual who aspires to become a disciple of the sinister path. He will interpret this maxim as advocating complete indifference to pleasure and pain achieved by ossifying the heart and eschewing all sympathy. Any individual who attempts to render themselves incapable of tears by extinguishing all sentiment acts in a manner conducive to the dark path. The individual upon the alternative path becomes incapable of tears solely insofar as his own personal tribulations are concerned. His own lower nature fails to perturb him, yet he remains fully cognizant of the emotions of others. Only at his own peril may a man become indifferent to the tribulations of his fellows. We may delineate the contrast between the two methods within a tabulation. The dark path and the white path. 1. Excludes all sensation of sorrow. Augments the capacity for feeling until it resonates with every vibration of others. 2. Erects a fortification around oneself to exclude all afflictions. Demolishes every wall or barrier that separates and precludes one from perceiving the sorrows of others. 3. Fundamentally constricts the existence. Expands the existence as one endeavors to pour oneself into the lives of others. 4. Leads to death and destruction and avicii. Leads to life, immortality, and nirvana. The fundamental divergence between the two paths is that the former inclines perpetually towards separateness, culminating in a condition of absolute isolation, whereas the latter aims constantly at union, concluding in a state of perfect unity. The aspirant upon the white path must gradually eliminate everything within himself capable of receiving from the external world anything perceived as pain affecting himself, anything that disturbs him through his personality, or any sorrow or tribulation whatsoever that operates upon him regarding his personal self. He must attain a juncture wherein he is incapable of experiencing sorrow for his own separate interest. Indeed, he is to aim at rendering his kamic sheath entirely a vehicle of the higher self, possessing no independent existence of its own. It is to possess neither attractions nor repulsions, neither desires nor wishes, neither hopes nor fears. The entirety of such phenomena is to be eliminated. This should not convey the erroneous concept that the sheath is to be destroyed. Rather, it must cease to respond on its own account to impressions from the external world. Only the separated life must be extinguished, but the sheath must be preserved for utilization in the service of humanity. This transformation that the disciple must effect in his own character is definitively manifested in the constitution of the sheath. In the ordinary disciple, it is constantly altering its hues. However, when it is purified and all separate life is purged away, it remains a colorless and radiant vehicle, affected only by the reflections emanating from the inner life. It possesses then no color of its own, but only that which is cast upon it from the higher self, resembling the appearance of the moon upon water, a pearly radiance in which there is a certain play that can scarcely be designated as color. This transmutation occurs quite gradually within the astral body of the disciple, while he labors at the arduous task of rendering himself responsive to all the sorrows of his fellow men, yet increasingly indifferent to all that affects himself. It would be exceedingly facile for him to extinguish every emotion, Yet to become increasingly sensitive to the sentiments of others while simultaneously permitting no personal feelings to intrude is the far more difficult task set before the aspirant. As he proceeds with the endeavor, however, he will discover that his selfish emotions quietly vanish as they are converted into unselfish emotions. The disciple may assay the quality and genuineness of his sympathy by observing whether he experiences it when the suffering of others is not intruded upon his notice. If you behold a person suffering, or if you encounter an instance of gross maltreatment, doubtless you experience pain. But do you experience the same pain when the individual is not present before your vision? Our sympathy is an exceedingly impoverished attribute if it is excited solely by the spectacle of suffering. Dispatch a person into a great metropolis like London, and he may be terribly affected by the suffering he observes around him. Yet remove him from that environment, and he will soon forget the miseries he has witnessed and will become perfectly content. The disciple must learn to exist as though the totality of that suffering were present before him principally. To alleviate it must constitute the motive of his labor. No one has attained the stage wherein he is responsive to the great cry of pain, spoken of in the voice of the silence, unless his motive in life is to succor humanity whether the suffering be before his eyes or otherwise, for that is the authentic motive power of a disciple. The optimal method to divest oneself of personality, to grow indifferent to one's own personal joys and sorrows, and to become incapable of tears, is to allow the mind to dwell upon the sorrow of the world and the means of alleviating it. This causes the personal self to be perceived in its true perspective beside the larger self of the great orphan humanity. When the disciple passes through initiation and commences to develop the Buddhic consciousness, this incapacity for tears assumes a new character. He then begins to comprehend the term evolution, to realize that in man it signifies the unfoldment of the higher triad. Subsequently, he begins to perceive the actual utility and objective of all suffering and pain. He gradually becomes incapable of tears because he comprehends the value of the suffering to those who are undergoing it, and because he perceives that when pain visits a man, it does so as an absolute necessity for the higher development of his soul. It is true that, theoretically, the man might have avoided that suffering had he acted wisely in the past, for it is the result of his past karma when it is not produced by his present follies. But the practical aspect of the matter is that the man has been foolish, has elected to learn through this mode of experience instead of through wisdom, because he has not always chosen to follow the best he knew, and now he is suffering, and the pain is bringing him wisdom for the future, thereby promoting his evolution. Realizing this, the disciple attains a condition in which he may be described as replete with the most perfect sympathy, yet without regret. The sensation of regret obtrudes solely when the consciousness remains unillumined by the Buddhic life. When the Buddhic consciousness is realized, the disciple's sympathy expands commensurately, yet his regret vanishes. Subsequently, as he ascends to higher planes, this amplified perspective renders him incapable of tears, for even whilst confronting the acutest suffering, to which he is learning to respond and to internalize, he simultaneously perceives its objective and ultimate conclusion. He is able to partake in the suffering in its entirety, yet without the slightest inclination that the circumstances should differ from their present reality. The absence of any desire to eradicate suffering prior to the completion of its function can exist solely when the consciousness possesses Buddhic illumination. This is the condition which has been designated as the Christ state. The law is benevolent and the will of the Supreme is perfect. Furthermore, the suffering operates toward a perfect conclusion. Consequently, the disciple is replete with contentment and satisfaction. He perceives the suffering, yet of grief and sorrow he experiences nothing whatsoever. When the disciple attains this stage, his consciousness has become an integral component of the life of the world. Should he conceive of himself as I, it is merely as a portion of that greater I wherein all other is also exist. Now there exists for him nothing external or separate from himself. He identifies with the one great life at whatever stage it may reside, and whenever it stands in need of succor. He entirely relinquishes the perception, so prevalent in the mundane world, of certain individuals being external. He is in all and with all. This realization of union affects a monumental difference in the assistance that the individual is capable of rendering unto the world. When he aids any person, he experiences that individual's tribulations as his own, rather than as the difficulties of another separate from himself. He perceives them exactly as that person does. Therefore, instead of assisting from the exterior, he provides aid from within. There exists a profound disparity between assistance offered from the exterior and that which is bestowed from within. The former is a temporary and adventitious aid, whereas the internal assistance augments the inherent power of the man's life. The disciple can attain this state only because he has cultivated sympathy, has learned to identify himself with the joys and sorrows of others, and has rendered his own existence a life common to all. Absent such preparation, this dissolution of separateness would remain unattainable. The sole incapability of tears that he must comprehend is that which renders him indifferent to matters touching the personal self, yet leaves him keenly sentient to all that affects the other souls surrounding him. C. W. Leadbeater. Our president has elucidated, with regard to the initial 4 statements in this volume, commencing with before the eyes can see they must be incapable of tears, that they may be interpreted in an entirely erroneous manner, and are subsequently as acceptable to the black magician as to ourselves. He would construe them to signify that he must extinguish all sensation, encase himself within a shell, and exclude the sorrows and tribulations of the world therefrom. That is the precise antithesis of the instruction imparted to the pupil upon the white path, who is admonished to augment his capacity for feeling until he attains perfect sympathy with the sufferings of his fellow men. We hear a great deal concerning black magicians, yet I suspect that few individuals possess substantial knowledge regarding them. I have encountered numerous specimens of the genus, and can therefore claim to comprehend something of their nature and methods. Certain among them are exceedingly interesting individuals, yet by no means desirable acquaintances. There exist numerous distinct types who are classified under the general appellation of black magician. For instance, the indigenous populations of South Africa and the West Indies, and likely the Aborigines of Australia, practice a considerable amount of petty black magic. It is a notably inferior art. Even they themselves concede that it is ineffectual against white people. One has heard of certain instances in which they have succeeded in rendering white people exceedingly uncomfortable. However, one must add that such success was facilitated by the manner of life those individuals led. Such magic relies for its success largely upon the fear of the subjects upon whom the incantations are cast, yet it remains a veritable phenomenon in its feeble manner. These primitive peoples possess certain narcotics, they understand the art of hypnosis, and they command power over certain low-class earth spirits and analogous entities. They contrive to induce sickness in a man, within his family, or among his flocks and herds, or to blight his gardens and fields such that they yield no harvest. Though in the latter instance, they are not above supplementing their magic occasionally with saltpetre. There exists another class of individuals, somewhat more dignified, who pursue occult power for their own objectives. They have acquired a certain measure of occultism, occasionally a substantial amount, yet they employ their power selfishly. They frequently contrive to acquire wealth and station by such means, and to sustain themselves in that position until their demise. Following their death, they sometimes attempt to continue upon the same general trajectory. However, this meets with indifferent success, their designs collapse, everything sooner or later fails them, and they regress into a condition of considerable misery. An existence of that nature signifies a quite definite retrogression for the ego. Yet another and more advanced type of black magician desires nothing for himself. He does not seek to obtain wealth, power, influence, or anything of that nature, and this immediately renders him vastly more formidable. He leads a pure and self-controlled life, precisely as some of our own adherents might do, but he has established for himself the goal of separateness. He desires to maintain his existence upon higher planes, exempt from absorption into the logos. He regards with horror that which, for us, constitutes the greatest felicity. He wishes to maintain his own position exactly as it stands. Furthermore, he asserts that he is capable of doing so, that the human will is sufficiently potent to withstand the cosmic will up to a certain point. I have encountered men of that description, and our president, who is ever endeavoring to salvage even the most unlikely souls, has set herself once or twice to convert individuals who have entangled themselves in that condition, attempting to bring them round to our mode of thought, though not, I fear, with significant success. She sometimes remarks to them, "You know what the conclusion shall be. You comprehend quite enough of the laws of nature, and you are sufficiently intelligent to perceive whither your path is leading you. It is quite certain that, in the end, you must collapse. When this Manvantara concludes, when this planetary chain is finished, you will be absorbed, whether you will it or not, into the logos at higher levels. And what shall be your condition then? You do not actually know that," they reply, "yet we admit that such appears to be what will transpire. But we tell you frankly that we do not care. We are well satisfied with our present position. We are able to maintain our individuality against any effort to draw us into the logos for a very long duration, even until the conclusion of the Manvantara. Whether we can sustain it thereafter we do not know, and we do not care. Whether we can or not, we shall have had our day." That is an arguable position, and the man who adopts it may not be precisely a virtuous man, but he need not be a wicked man in the ordinary sense of the word. He certainly possesses a great deal of satanic pride in his composition, yet he is not necessarily spiteful nor evil-minded with regard to other people. Nevertheless, he is absolutely unscrupulous. Anyone who happened to obstruct his path, he would brush aside with far less consideration than we should accord to a mosquito. However, to a man who did not stand in his way, he might prove a quite excellent friend, and there is not necessarily any active evil in his composition. He is not at all a monster of iniquity, but he is a man who has struck out a trajectory for himself, and is pursuing it at the cost of all that which to us signifies progress. That is all we have the right to articulate against him. We are confident that he will conclude in great disaster. He is not so certain of that, and in any event, he is willing to confront it. As a general principle, these individuals are sufficient unto themselves, and they harbor distrust and disdain for all others. Such an attitude is invariably characteristic of one who treads the dark path. He perceives himself as infallible while deeming all others in error. He regards every other being with condescension. Discourse occasionally turns to the existence of a black brotherhood. In truth, no such entity exists. There could be no genuine fraternity among such natures. However, they do occasionally coalesce in the face of imminent peril or when a circumstance jeopardizes their respective designs. At best, this constitutes a tenuous alliance, formidable solely by virtue of the tremendous power that certain among them possess. It transpires intermittently that the endeavors our masters undertake for the evolution of the world intersect with the tracks of these dark entities, at which point they become formidable adversaries. They remain unable to affect our masters, a fact I suspect must prove profoundly vexing to them. Yet they occasionally ensnare one of their pupils, thereby causing them some minor tribulation or disappointment, if indeed we can posit that a master is capable of experiencing disappointment. The rationale underlying the manifold admonitions to beware of these individuals is that we shall discover them attempting, on occasion, to lead us astray. Madame Blavatsky, who possessed extensive knowledge regarding them and maintained a wholesome respect for their capabilities, rather conveyed the impression that they were tempting demons who exult in iniquity for its own sake. This characterization would hold true only for those at an inferior level. The more potent among them would deem it quite undignified to exult in anything. Nevertheless, their machinations, which are invariably and exclusively self-serving, may occasionally entail substantial detriment to specific persons. They are as composed, self-contained, and passionless as any disciple of the Master. Indeed, they are arguably more so, for they have intentionally extinguished all sentiment. They would not injure a man merely for the sake of inflicting harm, but, as I have previously articulated, in the pursuit of some private objective with which his existence interferes, they would not hesitate to sweep him from their path. Those whose vocation is to assist individuals upon the astral plane occasionally encounter the victims of these entities. In such instances, the one who attempts to render aid often draws down upon himself the resolute opposition of the black magician. To revert to our primary subject, it is an exceedingly arduous task to learn to respond to emotions while permitting one's personality no manifestation whatsoever, to be in perfect sympathy with the feelings of others, and yet possess none of one's own. Many individuals are profoundly unsettled by the spectacle of another's suffering. Yet if they do not witness that tribulation directly, they dismiss it from memory. Many of the affluent inhabitants of a metropolis such as London, for example, when escorted to witness the terrible misery of the slums, are deeply affected and will immediately strive to alleviate the specific cases they observe. Yet, these same individuals will subsequently depart for their hunting, fishing, and amusements, becoming absolutely oblivious to the continued existence of such misery. In such instances, the sorrow is but partially for the other's suffering. It is largely merely the personal distress of having that suffering intruded upon their notice. Sympathy of that nature is a meager thing. Indeed, it is not genuine sympathy at all. When we fully comprehend the suffering of humanity, we gradually lose sight of our own. We cease to recall that we endure personal tribulations because we perceive that the anguish of humanity is so vast, and we realize that what falls to our lot is, after all, merely our portion of the general burden. A man who can attain such a state of mind has already very largely transcended his personality. He sorrows still for humanity, but no longer for himself. He has become incapable of tears insofar as his own personal joys and sorrows are concerned. It is not a facile matter to assess the sufferings of others with accuracy. Some years ago, The President and I investigated the question regarding the influence of pain upon different individuals undergoing what, from an external perspective, would be regarded as identical physical suffering. We ascertained that, in an extreme case, one person was suffering perhaps 1,000 times more intensely than another, and that in ordinary life one might quite frequently experience pain 100 times more acutely than another. If one individual exhibits signs of suffering and another does not, it must not be assumed that the latter is necessarily more courageous or philosophic. It may not be the case. We examined the question of the quantity of suffering inflicted upon different people by the ignominies of prison life. To some persons, these meant practically nothing, while to others they constituted the most intense mental and emotional anguish. Consequently, it is futile to assert, "I do not feel such and such a thing, and therefore other persons ought not to feel it either." One cannot know to what degree or in what proportion others are experiencing sensation. I have observed that many things which are of not the least consequence to me may nevertheless cause serious pain to others, whereas the situation has been quite the reverse regarding other matters, such as unpleasant sounds, for example, which often cause acute suffering to those who are cultivating their finer senses. I have witnessed our President in a condition of positive agony when a massive ammunition wagon went clanging past the residence where we were staying on Avenue Road in London. This does not imply, of course, that she lost control of her nerves. She has often elucidated that while the disciple must heighten his sensitivity, he must simultaneously control his nervous system so as to endure, without flinching, whatever pain or disturbance may befall him. Before the ear can hear, it must have lost its sensitiveness. Annie Besant. The disciple must become wholly indifferent to the opinions of others regarding himself, insofar as his own feelings are concerned. If they think and speak well of him, he is not to be elated. If ill, he is not to be depressed. Yet, at the same time, he must not be indifferent to the opinions of others as they affect the people who hold them. He is not, therefore, to be negligent regarding the impressions he produces upon others, for if he repels them by his conduct, he forfeits his power to assist them. The disciple, in the course of his progress, cultivates his psychic powers and thus becomes conscious of what others are thinking regarding him. He is then living in a world wherein he may hear everything articulated about him and may perceive every criticism within the mind of another. He reaches this point when he has transcended all criticism and remains unaffected by the opinions of others. Some individuals are exceedingly eager to develop clairvoyance before they have attained this stage. But if they realize this fact, the astral consciousness they so ardently desire would lose its attraction. C. W. Leadbeater. It must not be erroneously assumed that the developed person, who hears uncomplimentary remarks about himself and remains profoundly indifferent to them, deliberately steels himself against the sensation of irritation, declaring, "That is all very dreadful, but I refuse to care. I will not pay any attention to it." He traverses, no doubt, a stage of that nature. But very soon he attains a state wherein he absolutely and utterly does not care. It becomes to him merely as the twittering of birds, or the cicadas whistling in the trees. They may be a nuisance, but that is all. He does not isolate one particular cicada to listen to its tone alone, nor does he single out the thought or word of any one individual who is uttering something foolish. We must all strive to reach that stage. We are constantly presenting this before people because it is the attitude of our masters, into whose world we are striving to enter. They may very properly inquire, how can we hope to attain the attitude of these great ones? Of course, no one can accomplish this immediately, but we ought to be aiming at it and endeavoring to approach as near to it as we can, and one of the means of achieving this, a method which is, in truth, quite facile, is simply not to mind in the least what other people say. When we have attained that attitude, the subsequent step is to contemplate the adverse karma these individuals are generating by thinking or speaking wrongly concerning us. Consequently, we may experience regret on their behalf, and for that reason, it is advisable that we should endeavor not to provide more cause than we can avoid for fatuous and... Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.